Hi, attorney Carlos Colombo from Colombo and Hurd. And today we have an exciting topic to discuss. Trump won the presidential elections a few weeks ago, and we're going to talk about the potential effect that the new Trump administration may have on EB2 national interest waiver applications and other types of applications with immigration in 2025 and the years ahead. Today, we have a very special guest, one of our very own attorneys, Mandy Nees. Mandy, welcome.
Thank you.
And what's exciting about this is not only that Mandy is an expert in EB2 national interest waiver cases, but she's going to share with you her opinion as a former USCIS officer who handled applications such as the EB2 national interest waiver, especially during the last Trump administration from 2017 through 2021. So Mandy's going to give us her opinion, her perspective regarding what we may expect. Of course, Mandy, I don't think you have a crystal ball. If you do, I wanted you to share all your thoughts, not just about the Trump administration, but the future itself. But we don't have that crystal ball, right? So we don't specifically know what may happen. I think what we can do is look at the history of what happened during the last Trump administration, but also look at some of the recent comments that not only Trump, but some of his advisors and some of the folks that are going to be in the most important posts in the U.S. government with the new administration starting 2025. But I think one of the important lessons that a lot of people may have learned in this last election, and something that we as immigration attorneys, we know the details of how immigration actually works, right? But the difference in the types of immigration and sort of what at least around 50% of the country reacted to, which was sort of separating the word immigration into legal immigration and some of the undocumented immigration that we have seen the spike in the last few years. And there's a big difference regarding the two in how the government has been handling them and potentially what to expect with the new administration. Because this new administration seems to have they want to draw a line between legal and they call it illegal. I think it's better to call them maybe undocumented folks in the U.S. or some of the gray area of some folks perhaps going to the border and asking for asylum, which is a legal process in and of itself, or some of the temporary protected status or other humanitarian type of programs. They seem to want to draw a line. But let's start a little bit with a little bit of your background, Mandy, if you don't mind sharing your background as a USCIS officer and also now as an attorney with us at Colombo and Hurd.
So, as you said, I used to be a USCIS officer. I started with USCIS in 2008 after the 2007 visa blizzard, if you remember that. And I stayed with the agency until 2021, which included the Obama administration and the first Trump term. So, I have some unique perspective on how politics impacts the administration of immigration benefits. The first thing that I can tell you is that there are many things that we don't see about the administration of immigration benefits publicly. And so that really has to do with political appointments and things like that within the agency. So what I can tell you is that, the first Trump term really did focus on the humanitarian and the undocumented migration to the U.S. The national interest waiver petitions had just recently received a new decision, the Danisar decision in 2016. And so that really drove the changes that we saw in the NIW product line. The other big change that the Trump administration implemented was a focus on interviewing. And so the employment-based adjustment of status applications went to the field offices so that they could be interviewed. Of course, that wasn't really a practice that was really sustained for very long. They quickly realized that those interviews weren't yielding a lot of benefit. And so those adjustment of status applications are largely adjudicated without interview to this day. But they are conducted in the field offices by field officers rather than service center officers. That was
Right.
a
So I
change
think,
that
yeah, and that's a good point, Mandy, because they seem to want to focus on preventing fraud, which USCIS in general is always trying to prevent fraud, and is something that I don't think anyone would be against any kind of policy that would help to avoid fraudulent applications. That hurts everyone. Um, that the so some of those measures regarding the either the undocumented or on the adjustment of status side didn't have a huge impact on mostly on the employment based EB1, EB2, especially in the NIW, like you said after the Danisar decision. Um, did you see a policy shift internally, or was that more of especially on the employment side, was that, like you said, mostly uh, implementing on the undocumented side or other issues unrelated to NIW?
correct. I didn't see very many changes related to the administration of the National Interest Waiver petition or the EB1 petitions. Some changes in DACA, right? The DACA product was at the Nebraska Service Center as well, and that was put on hold. Um, Lots of changes to how they wanted to do asylum, changes to working conditions for federal employees. Those were big. And that's actually something that I'd like to talk a tiny bit about, just so that people understand how that could impact the timing of the decision on their case, even if the policy toward their matter doesn't change very much. So the first Trump term also coincided with the pandemic. And I think it's important to understand that the first Trump term also saw a lot of delays in processing. And I just want everyone to be mindful that that coincided with the early stages of the pandemic. USCIS had started to see a decline in receipts due to everyone believing that things were going to be less immigrant friendly. And then the pandemic travel restrictions came into play. As a result of that, USCIS had this shortage in receipts that had never really been seen before. And so they had a lot of financial issues. Their funds come mostly from the receipts that they receive. They don't get very much funding from Congress. So it really, really impacted the finances of USCIS to have the pandemic and that decline in receipts. And so then they were faced with possibly having to furlough about 85% of the workforce. And so that could impact things. You know, the Trump administration really didn't have a lot of love for federal employees, even though they're essential to the administration of all kinds of federal programs. That's just wasn't a priority for them. And then the way that USCIS is funded just put them in this financial crunch. We were able to advocate effectively and get congressional funding to cover that gap. And so everyone who was working there got to keep their jobs. But it was a time when people were retiring and not being replaced, and there was a federal hiring freeze as well. So if we think about possible adjustments to how things might look, I think that timeline based on the size of the federal workforce or the relative training of the federal workforce is possible. Now, from my perspective, I don't think that we should change what we're doing until we see that, right? Because right now, again, as you pointed out in the beginning, we don't really know what's going to happen. That might
Right.
happen, that might not happen. But that's something that's different now. We hope that we don't have another pandemic,
That's a great
right? And
point. Yeah, and people may not think about that, and it's not really something that is discussed in the news, right? Because it's not as fun of a topic, perhaps, to get into these details on budgets and things of that nature. But I mean, I think, if I were to summarize a little bit of what you just said, is it we cannot, for those that take the position that perhaps there was a little bit of a slowdown towards the end of the Trump administration on adjudications. It's not, you're not really comparing apples and apples, because the pandemic had a big effect towards the end of his first mandate. Um, but if we actually look at approval rates, the approval rates, which is something that is important to us as attorneys for the AB2 and IW, were fairly high during the Trump administration. We did not see a decrease in the approval rates of EB2 and IW, did we?
no, we didn't. In fact, I think, to my recollection, the approval rates were higher then than they were now, which is, I think that's partly because of the change in the decision, right? I mean, going from the matter of New York versus Department of Transportation to DNSR was a big adjustment, and there was a lot of retraining and a lot of training of new officers. And I think that that's the shift in the DNSR decision was really there to give adjudicators more flexibility. And I think we embrace that flexibility. And now it feels like that flexibility is starting to firm up.
Right.
So,
But if we take that, yeah, and I think, with the Biden administration, we didn't see for a few years, the approval rates remained fairly high, and then in the last 6 to 9 months, it seemed to started dropping some. Um, but what can we predict from this now second Trump administration? I think it's going to be sort of the interesting question. So if we take historically, the first Trump administration seemed to be very supportive of high skilled immigration. Now, let's look at what they've been saying, at least publicly, Mandy. Some of the comments that have been made in the last few years, because Trump has been basically running a new election for the last 4 years, really. But
right.
especially in the last 2 years, he has put a fairly big focus on immigration. So let's look at like these three quotes. We must ensure a strong and formidable border while welcoming individuals to our country. I am not opposed to immigration. We encourage it, but it must be lawful. It's one of those things where you get encouraged that, yes, if you do it the right way, hopefully this administration will welcome you. We want a system that is based on merit, not based on random chance or what country you come from. And we want to make sure that when people come in, they're highly qualified and can contribute to our economy and society, which is essentially the AB2 and IW, right? And then there's some other quotes there. And then if we look at some of the folks that have been influencing the administration or are going to be a part of it, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, who are now in this new department, which I'm not sure is a government department or not. It doesn't seem like it, but it seems like it's going to be a department that may try to do away with some of the bureaucracy, and we'll have to see what it does. But at least these two individuals, the richest person in the world, and Vivek, who I mean, Elon is an immigrant himself, high skilled immigrant. Vivek also. They seem to be very supportive of high skilled immigration. The United States needs more immigrants with technical skills. Elon says they can help solve the world's biggest problems like climate change and poverty. he's also said the legal immigration process in America needs to be greatly streamlined and expanded, while illegal should be shut down. If someone is talented, hardworking, and honest, they are an asset to the country. And same thing with what Vivek has said. I believe in merit-based immigration system that prioritizes skill, talent, contributions to American economy and society. So it seems like the push, and now actually this week we learned, well, JD Vance, obviously vice presidential candidate, and now will be the vice president, and Kristi Noem, who will be leading the Department of Homeland Security. USCIS is under DHS, and Marco Rubio, who will be the new Secretary of State. Who, if you don't know, the Secretary of State, the State Department handles all consular processing for all visas. So he's going to be in charge of the embassies and the consulates around the world, the United States embassies and consulates. And Rubio has been historically pro-immigration, especially legal immigration. And he highlighted that we should have a legal immigration system that prioritizes individuals who can make an immediate and meaningful contribution to our economy. This includes high-skilled workers, such as those in EB2 visa category, who are critical to our nation's competitiveness and innovation. So they seem to be sort of singing the same tune on prioritizing legal immigration. It seems like that's hopefully going to be the focus. And like we said at the beginning, that there will be a division between undocumented or the asylum type of applications versus the high skill immigration. Is that what you predict?
Yes, I do. I agree with you. Those are all very encouraging things. I would love to see some of those policies actually be implemented. You know, it's unfortunate that immigration is so polarized politically, and we don't think about it in terms of what the US can gain. We only think about it in terms of what we think we're giving up, right? And we think we're giving up domestic labor wages. We think we're giving up domestic public benefits. None of those things are really true, right? The US has so much to gain economically from immigration, and it's so critical to our future, including the future of our public benefit plans. You know, every rich country in the world, we have a population decline, and the US population would be dropping off precipitously as well. But it's, you know, predicted to stay very stable, and most of that is because of immigration. And so I would really love to see that shift, and not just around skilled immigration, because we have a shortage of like 7 million lower skilled jobs that we need to fill.
Right.
And so it's super important that we value all jobs and that we value all contributions, not just the skilled ones, but also to recognize that those skilled immigrants who are coming in are creating jobs here in the US and contributing to our financial system greatly. I think I read recently that something like 1 in 6 tax dollars is paid by an immigrant. It's incredible. And so, really, the shift needs to be, what do we need and how do we get that?
Exactly.
Because right now, and I still feel like they gatekeep a tiny bit, right? Because they're talking about, well, we'll allow the skilled portion and not, we're trying to get that.
Right. And I think that's an important point to highlight and to clarify, that the discussion today is around the you and I are having is around the future Trump administration's effect on green card applications for self-sponsor individuals like EB2 NIW or EB1A. But that does not mean that that we think that it is positive, at least the message has been positive on high skill immigration. But that doesn't mean that that should be it, right?
Right.
We need to make sure that on the one hand, We have to secure our borders, and I think everyone has been in agreement that a secure border is important, and something needs to be done about that. But we also need to make sure that we have an asylum and refugee program that is humane and that it works, because we are the United States of America, and we need to make sure that we're protecting those that are in need, and that we have a skilled labor force on issues like manufacturing, and agricultural work, to ensure that the United States remains the biggest economy in the world. And so the skills are not only going to be high skills that are going to be needed, there's going to be different types of skills. And I think Elon Musk has also, I've seen it on X plenty, where he's advocating for more babies around the world, because he keeps saying it's not just an issue in the United States, but in other developing and developed nations where the birth rates are dropping so much. Russia has the same issue, has a huge issue with birth rates. Even China, Japan, South Korea. So this is going to become an issue globally. And so without immigration, that's going to have an impact, be irreparable. Once that starts happening, you can't really stop it. So those are all important policy issues that are going to face the new Trump administration. But today we're focusing on the high skilled, right? And the high skilled is something that is a priority, hopefully, for this new administration. Do you see, based on that historical background and what we're seeing now, what would you suggest to someone who is considering potentially applying for an NIW right now? Because a lot of the questions we get are, should I do it or should I wait? My advice has always been waiting. If you've decided you want to apply and you think you qualify, waiting is usually not a good idea.
I agree. I think that, you have to show up in life for yourself and for your goals, regardless of the shenanigans that are going on in DC, right?
Exactly.
All of us, right? You, me, in our practice and in our lives, we have to do the things that are important to us. And we have to stay true to that. That's what really matters. This is going to be 4 years. We all have much longer than that in our careers and in our the lives that we want to live. And so my advice is always show up for the life that you want to live. And if that's in the US, please let us help you. We're happy to take on those clients with that goal and that ambition. And if you feel like you're not ready or it's too much risk, think about how, your timeline, and think about getting comfortable with that risk. When I think about risk management and change management, I like to think about the things that come from risk that maybe you didn't see coming, right? There could be things that come out of this administration that are silver linings that neither of us are seeing right now. And there could be things like that just from the change that we're not seeing yet. As I mentioned in our attorney meeting recently, when Trump came into office, I was doing adjustments. When he came in, I had to switch and do I-140s because the adjustments went into the field. And the I-140s really gave me my post-government career. So that wasn't a change that I was super excited about, to be honest with you.
Because change can be difficult sometimes, right?
Change is difficult and risk is difficult. So,
Right.
when we think about risk, we have to think about what we put into these petitions, how we prepare our career, how we prepare our evidence. That's the side that we can control, right? And then we have to wait until we have more evidence on the decisions and how those are going to come down.
Right. And usually, with immigration, the demand historically keeps going up every year. That's a reality. I don't think that's going to stop. I think demand will continue. In fact, the conversations we're having with most interested clients nowadays, post the election, is people are excited that the U.S. economy will continue to improve, um, and they want to be a part of that. So, on a risk reward analysis, if you wait, demand usually continues to go up. Um, so that's why, and also things continue to change. I mean, you were with the Bush administration, the George Bush administration, with the Obama administration, and then the Trump administration during your career as a USCIS officer. I've been practicing even longer, and so I had other administrations before that I've went through, and the reality is that demand during my almost 26 years now as an attorney every year keeps going up, 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 and up. So, despite some of the rhetoric on anti-immigration, despite a lot of what we see, demand will continue to go up, and so that's why it's my belief that waiting is usually not a good idea. It's going to be, I'm sure, and there's going to be some challenges, and I think that would be sort of my closing message. And I think, Mandy, you would be in full agreement that because there may be some challenges and some potential changes in how things are handled. Having experienced U.S. based immigration attorneys is critical, not only for the I-140 phase, but also for the consular processing.
Agree 100%. And if we see things really changing, the most important thing there is not just that they have experience, but that you trust them to be transparent with you when they see those changes, right? And I think that's why these messages are so important, right? So that we can talk about what we're seeing and we can develop, our insights so that we can share those with our clients. Because risk also has to do with trusting ourselves and knowing what to do when we see things changing.
Exactly.
And so
And part of
we
the
can't.
advantage is that we have is that we see it in more real time than because of we handle thousands of applications every year. It's we get to see that a little bit faster than if someone's doing it on their own. For example, they're gonna have no idea. They have to rely on Google search being correct or whatever information they may get on the internet as being accurate, and that's not always the case, unfortunately. So hiring an expert, I think, is going to be even more important as we potentially get some changes in the next 4 years.
Correct. And the expertise, the transparency, um, having people in different phases of this, it's so important to see the consular processing side and the adjustment side and the I-140 side and see how they're all, similar and different, right? It's really important to have all of those perspectives being shared amongst the attorneys in the office so that we can all learn. It's super important because no one wants to get an approved I-140 and then not be able to get into the country, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Well, Mandy, really, it's always a pleasure having these chats with you. I always learn, your 13 years in USCIS as an officer are uh, really just an amazing, amazing experience that you had, and we're really thankful here at the firm to have you as an expert in the field, and to give us your perspective on the last Trump administration and what we can maybe try to predict for the next administration. It may be an interesting ride, but we'll do it together. We will help you through this process. And like we said, if you're interested in learning more about the EB2 NIW process, there's a link below. We can have a free consultation with you to evaluate your profile. And go through some of the items that Mandy and I just went through. and what we may expect from a new Trump administration that appears to be focused on increasing high-skilled immigration to the U.S. It's always a pleasure to share this with you, Mandy. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back.